a lot of you in your projects, what you're going to discover when you start UV mapping, when you take it into Headus, if there's a problem with the mesh, it could be there's some n-gons or some other technical issues. Headus is not gonna accept the mesh, so which is a good thing because then you can address the problems. So it's going to tell you that it's going to highlight if there's some n-gons or something like that. So don't be surprised if that happens because very common. We have to go over the models and really make sure they're technically correct before we do the UV mapping. So I think that's probably going to happen to a lot of you once you're ready for UV mapping and you thought your model was good to go, and then you have to do a bit of cleanup. So let's open this in Maya and we'll have a look at it. So my Maya is taking a bit to update. I don't know. It's lagging a bit. Hello. Maybe Maya just needs to wake up. Yeah, now it seems okay. Alright, so let's have a look at the model. So this is looking very nice, very clean. So this is a multi-mesh asset. So if you want to, if you want to follow along, I guess you could also grab the staff in here. Work. I put my folder on the very top. You can go in there. Staff. What's your name? Staff owner? Huh? Edith? Okay. You don't mind if people try the staff, right? Don't submit it as your work, but you can try it out. So this is a multi-mesh asset. It's an asset containing of several meshes, and they're just tucked together right next to each other, which is nice. You don't have to combine them. They're separate meshes. Totally fine. And what's that? Edith? It's just a little detail. Yeah. Okay. So let's see how much. Okay. So yeah. So this is pretty challenging example, which is good because let's see what Headus can do for us. So I think let's just delete history. That's the first thing. We just select all the meshes, delete history, freeze transformations. Just making sure this is nice. And since we have multiple meshes, we can just combine them. Like I said, I don't like combining things, but now I will combine it because I'm going to export it as an OBJ, and I just want them out of here quickly. So this is the combined version, and I delete history, and then I'm going to export this as an OBJ. And put that wherever, so I'm going to put it on the same spot, teaching, no, work. CGArt1 and Jules, and I'll call that staff. So in the OBJ export options, I just leave things as is, but I check materials off. Like I don't need to export the material for it. So OBJ export, fine, export. So did you, Edith, did you attempt UV mapping this at all? No, so it has no UVs, so that's perfect. So even if it had UVs, it wouldn't matter, just checking. So then we go back to UV layout, and we can load. Now we need to find the directory. Oh, I always forget. How do I get on the server from here? I forgot how I did that. So I am gonna just copy the staff over, so it's local. So copying that temporarily over. Yep. What's that? OBJ. obj, obj export, it should say, in the little file thing. And I'm just going to copy it over locally right now. Just put it somewhere on the computer. And put it on the desktop. Just so I can get it in here. Oh, it should show up. Come on. Seems like UV layout's not happy. No. Load. Oh, there it is. So, see the directory right there? It's going just to the desktop. So I'm working off of the server. Oh, I guess we could just enter. Yeah, we could try that. Let's try that. If I enter the path directly in there. So I go in here, work, CGArt1, joules, and this is the path, so I'm copying that. Or actually, I can click the file even. Oh, well, that one. Okay, never mind. This is the path. Yeah, so that will take me to the server. Alright. Okay, so this is the interface. I can rotate around using left mouse button, right mouse button, go in and out, middle mouse button, move around. So one thing I'm going to do, if I'm going to go down to display and go to free, because this is, for some reason, it's like frozen in this axis. I don't like that, so set it to free, so then you can just rotate around. And it's just like in Maya, except you don't have to hold Alt. You can just move around. So this is the world viewport. I can rotate around. I can go in and out. Okay. And then here you can see view. So right now we're in edit mode. Are you guys, you want to follow along with this, or are you good? Are you able to get the OBJ in Headus? Okay. And then I have UV mode right here. So if I go to UV mode, you see there's nothing in there. So it says nothing in UV. So we need to drop things from edit mode into UV space. So let's start unwrapping one of these objects. Let's just start with, well, let's start with this guy. Hold spacebar. We can do middle mouse button. I can just move things around. This is just moving them out of the way, so it's a little bit easier to see. So now this works in the following way. I'm just going to find an edge where it makes sense to cut this object. And the thinking is just like, okay, what if I have this object in front of me physically? Where do I need to cut it open so I can just fold it out? Right? So that becomes the challenge. Like, where does it make sense to cut it? So for this, I'm just going to cut it probably along the middle line. I'm just going to cut it in half, basically. So to do that, I hover over the edge and I press C for cut. If there is a way for it to select the whole edge loop, I don't know how to do that. So you gotta go over it, press C, hover over the middle mouse button, and so eventually you would have selected that whole thing. So you just press C and it keeps cutting along that edge loop. And this object is constructed in a nice way. It seems to have that middle dividing line, so it makes it kind of nice. And then I can follow up on the backside. So keep cutting. Oops, undo. Keep cutting. Alright, So there, selected the whole entire edge loop. And when I'm done with the selection, I can press enter. That will actually cut it. So hover over the object, all the edges you've selected and highlighted, pressing C will actually cut. And then you press enter, it will actually cut it. So now I can also use spacebar and middle mouse button. I can, okay, so these are not completely separated yet. If they were, I would have seen, like when I did this, it would no longer be one continuous object. I would be dragging, I'd be separating them. So somewhere there's an edge here still connected. So this is Headus. It's a little bit weird. But it has very powerful unwrapping algorithms. Oh, so there it is. So you see that? I can cut it. Okay. Now, if I press spacebar, middle mouse button, and drag, you see the two halves separate. Okay, so now I can try to drop these into UV space, and I'm going to try to unwrap them there, which means just flattening them so that we can have textures. Ready? Let's drop. So to drop them, we press D. So hover over them, press D means drop, and then they go away from edit mode. Now they're in UV world. They're gone from here. If you go over to UV world, there they are, but they're currently not unwrapped. They have their geometrical shape. To unwrap, I can press Shift F. Then it'll start doing its unwrapping. So this is a pretty complicated object, right? But it's doing its best using the algorithm it has to it keeps flattening the object. Yep, question. How do you cut it? You just press C. Hover over an edge, press C. You press enter. So enter will execute the cut. Yep. And if you made a mistake, there's no real easy way. You just have to undo a lot. No. Okay, so this is a pretty complicated shape, right? We're starting off with a pretty difficult example, but that's okay. Press spacebar, you can stop that that flattening operation. You can try it again. It's probably going to mess up again. So for these more complicated shapes, we can cut them open a little bit more to help the software. So I'm gonna just, we can also cut in here in UV space. So I'm gonna press C, cut, enter, and then I'll do Shift F, space bar to stop it. See that unwrapped it beautifully. And then I'll do the same over here. So press C, press enter, cut it open, then Shift F, space bar, unwrap that, Shift F. Okay, so it needs some time with this. Okay, space bar. Now I'm going to cut it open here. And Shift F. So you see, you can keep working it. You have to, for these complicated shapes, you might have to cut it up a little bit more. But if you were to UV map this using like a projection-based method, like we briefly looked at yesterday, you would be spending a lot of time. This would take a long time, a lot of hours to get it to this level, because right now this is technically very, very nicely laid out because there's close to zero texture distortion, like very, very minimal. So there's a color indication here. You want green. The more green it is, it means it has very little texture distortion. The more towards red, it means the UVs are occupying too little space. So you will get texture distortion because the UVs are not representing the polygons as good as they can. And blue means they're occupying too much space. So to do this, if you hold spacebar in here and left mouse button and hold, you can scale. I don't want to do that because I'm messing up the texel we talked about yesterday, like the texel density. this is no longer matching the rest. But now that you see that's very red, that means this is too small. And if I do the opposite, now that's very blue. Oh, it's too large. So that's what the color indication means. So you see that's very green, so that's a very good sign. Okay. You can press 1, 2, 3 also to toggle between like UV mode, edit mode, and the third one is a 3D mode. And in here you can actually view the object with that color indication. If you press T, you can also toggle between. So here you have kind of what we did a lot of yesterday with a checkerboard pattern. So you can see that there's very, very little distortion. This is brilliant, brilliant. And it's paintable, right? It makes sense. You know, this is a continuous UV shell. All right, so I cut this open. I could leave them like that, but for a better sort of UV solution, I'm going to merge them back together. And to do that, I can press W, that's for weld, and I can go over W, 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 W there, and press Enter. That's going to weld it back together. So just place them really close to each other, and press W, 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 and press Enter. That's going to weld it back. And then I can run the flattening. Oh, there's a little piece down there as well. So I'm just putting it as closely as I can, and then W to weld and Enter. And I can run the flattening operation just a little bit. So again, so I can press F. I'm just like really touching F a little bit. I'm just going to run the flattening operation. Now you see it's one continuous UV shell, very, very complex shape. And we did that in no time. So it's very, very powerful, and you have a lot of control. So same process with this. I'm just going to do that a little bit quicker. So Shift F is going to start the unwrapping, and then press spacebar to stop. I'm going to keep cutting this open again. And Shift F. And I'm just going to cut this piece. So it's a little bit of this, a little bit manual labor, but it's fine. There you go. Shift F, spacebar. When you see that it's green, again, that's good. So there we go. And it took care of that pretty nicely. So oh, and so spacebar, left mouse button, you can rotate. Spacebar, middle mouse button, you can move them around, and spacebar, right mouse button will scale them, which you don't want to do because then you're messing up the uniform scale. So that's why I opted to combine all the objects. So if you have a if you have an asset with several objects, which in this case it has several meshes, you can combine them all and export them as an OBJ. So when you import them in here and just keep UV mapping all the pieces, it's going to keep a uniform textile density automatically. They're in the same scale. And then press F, flatten that a little bit. W, 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 Enter, press F. All right. Yeah, so there's the pieces. They're funny looking UV shells, but it's a funny looking shape. It's an intricate shape. So this will really give you a minimal texture distortion. So again, we can see the checkerboard. So same process for the rest of them. So now we're done with that. Go back to edit mode. Repeat, repeat, repeat. So okay, so another point here is if you have a lot of repeating elements, you don't really have to go in and do the UV mapping for each of these. You do it for one of them. So I would have, if I had my head where it's supposed to be, I would have exported only one of these, right? So then I would have copied the UVs over after, or even copied the objects after the fact. So let me show you that afterwards. But I'm just gonna UV map one of these, all of these elements, whichever, that one. So for a sphere, there's several ways of doing it. We can cut it in 4, we can cut it in half, and then live with a little bit of texture distortion. Let's see. Let's try to cut it in half. There's going to be some distortion, obviously. Did I drop it? No. Did I drop it? Where did it go? It's not here. I'm confused. If I did drop it, it's disappeared in invisible UV space. Okay. That's strange. There's a lot of spheres. DD. Yeah, it does seem like... Where are they going? Oh, they're down there, right. Okay, thank you. It's very small compared to the other one. Okay, so here are all of those. Shift F, spacebar. So you see, it's going to be a little bit of distortion, obviously. But if I want to cut it up and more, I can also do that in here and keep flattening. So now we have a different solution, like that. So that would be cutting it in 4, essentially. We can also cut it in here. So we get those orange slices, kind of a thing. So there's my one sphere. And then, yeah, I could do this one as well, but I'm going to Shift D. That means to undrop it, and I'm just going to put it back in edit mode. Don't need it. And then, okay, so here's another sphere. That's bigger, so I'm going to do that one as well. So cut. Drop, drop. Oh no, I dropped too much. That's fine. So back in UV mode, I'm going to Shift D to undrop that guy. Shift F and Shift F. And let me cut these again. So, very repetitive. This is how you do it. There's not too much thought process going into this, except for you can be a little bit mindful where you place the seams, because that's where potentially you're going to have a texture seam, right? When you're doing traditional Photoshop texturing. So you want to place the texture seams where they're not as visible, right? So that's the only thing you would then think about. But for these, I'm just cutting them in half. Seems like, why not? It's a nice solution. So, oh, is that a symmetrical object? Yes, but it doesn't have a dividing line exactly in the middle. If it did, we could tell Headus to recognize symmetry, and then you can only make the cuts on one side, and it will automatically do it on the other. And let's see, there we go. Let me drop these. Let's see if yeah, I'll show you. I can show you on a sphere. So we have one more sphere, right? That's a different size. No. Okay, never mind. But let's do it on this sphere. So to do the symmetrical thing, you can go edit and find the symmetry, find. So then you highlight the middle edge. Let's say it's this one, press spacebar. So then whichever cuts I'm doing on this side, it's also going to be done on the other side. So then you can save some time, especially if you have an intricate symmetrical object. So you make the cut, you see it performs it on both sides across that symmetrical axis. Okay. So let's keep going. What's this guy? Yeah, so keep cutting it up. What are we going to do for this? Same thing. I'm going to cut it in half. And then, yeah, for this, here you can see that this is going to cause an issue with the unwrap because it's just it's going to go to that point. So I could do a simple solution to just cut these apart. Let me do that. I'm just going to cut those apart. Keeping it simple. Just getting these unwrapped. D, 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 D for unwrap, or for a drop. And then Shift F, spacebar. So for those little end pieces, I guess I could have welded them together again. So I'm going to do that. W, W, enter, F to flatten. There we go. Yeah, so see, I'm not worrying about the layout yet. I'm just unwrapping and dropping things around. I don't care about the layout yet. So Shift F. So this is going well. Seems to be like a very clean mesh. There's no huge issues with it. So this is causing an issue. See right here, we got to be careful. So this is now overlapping UVs on the same object. So remember yesterday we talked about no overlapping UVs per object. So to nudge UVs around after the fact, I can hold Control and middle mouse button, and I can actually move UVs around. So I'm just moving that in here. Or I can also hold Shift and middle mouse button. That's also to move it around, but it's going to do it in a little bit softer way, so you get a more soft selection. Yep. So yeah, a little bit of distortion there. To get rid of that, I could have cut it open here if I was really concerned with it, but I'm not concerned with it. It's just at the very tip, and it's not very red. Very red looks like that. This is just like, okay, so there's a little bit of distortion. It's fine. It's fine because sometimes you have to make these. There will be a little bit of distortion sometimes if you want continuous UV shells. If you were unwrapping something and only, let's say, each polygon had their own UV space, there would be no distortion because a polygon is 2D. But whenever you have geometrical shapes, obviously. Right, so no. Alright, so there you go. Alright, so in large, if you're UV mapping like this in a very large asset or complicated, and you're spending a lot of time, you can consider saving the UVL document, which is the UV layout document. It's like saving a Maya scene, so you can open this back up. And then you can save. I'm going to go down here, and it's going to call staff, but I'm just going to delete where it says OBG, and I'm going to type UVL. So that's UV layout document. Save. So now there's a UVL file saved on the same path. Alright, so last guy. This is this is a challenge. Let's just cut this in pieces right away. So I'm gonna do that part. Do this part. Let's take care of this guy first. So that's pretty simple. I'm gonna cut it in half. Yeah, so if someone figures out how to select edge loop, that would be good. There's probably a feature in there. There's actually a lot of features in Headus. It's pretty sophisticated for unwrapping. Like this. It looks like there's not a lot in here, but there's a lot of features. You can, if you open the About UV Layout, you'll find the user manual if you're especially interested. All right, enter, and then they're in half, and now I can drop D, and Shift F. So that took care of that one. Yeah, this is smooth sailing with this asset. So it seems like technically very nice work. If there's an issue with some of the polys, this won't work, right? There's going to be some error messages. But this is going well. Alright, so back to edit mode. Yeah, same thing for this. I think I'll just attempt to cut it in half again. So UV mapping used to be a whole lot even less fun when yeah, if you're using the projection method that we looked at yesterday. It just takes forever. Like this object would have taken, this asset would have taken you probably like a work day at least. So, you know. But it probably won't be too long till this isn't fully automated, you know. Just throw some AI on this and tell it to unwrap it. But for now we have to do a bit of labor. Alright, so this is also a complicated shape, and as you know, the more you cut it, the easier it is to prevent texture distortions. Now you see there will be some distortion. These will get a little less space than they need, and this will get a little bit more. But if you look at the number 3, look at the checkerboard, that's acceptable. It also it depends a little bit on your texture needs. So if this were to be like wood texture, no one's going to notice this. Look at the checkerboards, they're pretty even. It's pretty good, right? But if it needs to be a very, very continuous pattern, and it would be very obvious if it were slightly off, then I think this would still be acceptable. This example would be okay. But then, obviously, in those cases, you have to be a bit more, yeah, you can't get away with as much. Then weld these, www, enter F to flatten a little bit, and there's that piece. Okay, great. So what's missing? Only those? Oh no, we have a little piece there. So that's the same deal, right? Seems like I don't know how to set the clipping planes in here. It seems like it clips off. That's fine. I can still see it. Yeah, so selecting things and also I guess the navigation could be improved, but it's not so bad, and it's really worth it for the time you save after all. And for the unwrap, it does a really good job with the unwrap. So there we go, press enter. space bar just to check the middle mouse button to see if they're separate, and then D to drop. And I'm also going to cut this one again, and that one. D, 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 D. And now I think we're done with all the pieces. Just going to unwrap this guy. Shift F. And just leave it for a little bit. Spacebar. Same thing. And sometimes you can also abort the operation before it's finished, because sometimes actually, if you press Shift F, you're like, maybe it's better there, and then you can stop it. So sometimes that helps. Don't leave it running for too long. You'll also notice sometimes if you leave it for too long, it'll start messing up the result in a bad way. But that's okay. So yeah, here we go. Last little thing. And then I'm going to weld these. Okay, weld W, 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 and enter, and F. Perfect. So now we have a lot of UVs floating around. I haven't paid attention at all to placing them within the 0 to 1 or anything about layout, but they're all in the right scale. In other words, equal textile density in all the objects. There's minimal texture distortion, so technically they're fine. So what's lacking now is to make the layout and finally place them all in 0 to 1. So this is 0 to 1 right there, that little red rectangle, but I don't want them in there right now. There's some packing features you can optimize, blah blah blah. There's automatic packing, which doesn't really work too great in my opinion, but you can try them if you want. I like doing this bit in Maya. Okay, so I will just save this right now as an OBJ, and then I will manually just make the layout in Maya. But you can experiment with this if you want. So now I'm going to save. Let me just override the previous OBJ. So staff OBJ, save done. And then I'll try to open that in Maya. So import and staff OBJ, import. Did that work? So UV editor. Yeah. So there we're looking at the OBJ. It's back in Maya. Let me just delete the previous one from the scene. I don't need that. This is our new guy. And then I don't like having things combined personally, so I'm just going to go separate. Oh, well, I can leave it like that for now for simplicity. So here, but now then we need to organize the layout. So even though you have multiple objects in an asset, they could be a part of the same layout, or you can have multiple layouts. There's no like written rule. What's like I mentioned yesterday, because the materials now are getting so good, you know, the PBR materials that you eventually will start playing with, they can represent nearly anything. So like 98% of your texturing needs, you can do that in one single material, which means you can comfortably and confidently leave everything in one single layout. And even though you have very different needs, like maybe some pieces will be gold, some pieces will be wood, some pieces will be rubber, it doesn't matter. You can leave it in the same layout, and then just by authoring the texturing maps, making different texture maps, you can make it look really, really different. So most common, at least for in-game models, you know, everything would be condensed in a highly condensed layout for an asset. For VFX, sometimes you can opt to have more. Like I said, there's no clear rule. But anyways, so all I need to do now is to start organizing these into some sort of quadratic layout. So I go to right-click and hold UV shell, and this is kind of just using the texture editor, UV texture editor, and nudging these around, trying to be creative with how densely can you place them together is the challenge right now. how close can you place them to each other without having them overlap? So that's step number 2. So now we just used Headus to do all the unwrap, and now we're using Maya to just make the final UV layout. Like I also briefly mentioned yesterday, Maya has some new unwrap tools, so they are sort of eventually getting the same ability as Headus, but at least in the previous versions, it's still not up to par with the unwrap algorithm in Headus. It doesn't do as good of a job with keeping it distortion free, in my opinion, and especially also I've seen that if you have multiple objects, it will not do as good of a job as keeping that same texel density. That will be slightly off. But maybe now it's better. I don't know. All right. So, but anyway, so you can work wherever you want here. The only thing you don't want to do is start scaling these independently of each other, because then you're going to mess up the uniform scale. Obviously, we can move them around, but I don't want to start scaling these independently. I'm leaving the scale as is. So you know, this might take some time, and the more time you spend with this, chances are eventually you're going to get more and more condensed result, which is what you want. And then yeah, so under here, under the UV toolkit, this is a new addition to Maya. But here you can go to transform, tools, rotate, and here you can rotate in increments, so 90-degree increments, which is kind of nice. Yep. So for in-game models, this is really, really crucial to optimize the space as much as you can. So you just do creative things like put things in all the little spaces that you can fit them. But also you can also think about having it so that it's practical for texturing. So maybe you want to, you know, I can do this with the shell so that it'll fit in there, but then also I would have to rotate my canvas in Photoshop and things, which is okay, but maybe it's better to leave the shell like this. So I'm keeping it, after all, this is the end purpose of this is to have this as a reference for texturing, right? So you see condensing it like that. Maybe these will fit in there. And then, yep. And these guys fit in there. So it becomes this map you have to navigate afterwards, like figure out what part is, what am I looking at in Photoshop? And then gradually complete the map. You know, but you see where we're getting at, making it more and more condensed. So I could have spent more time. I'm not going to do that. So now I can obviously scale all of them at once. That's going to keep the uniform scale. And then when I'm done with the packing, I put them here and I make sure that everyone's inside 0 to 1. So inside of that 0 to 1 quadrant. And it's very important that they're inside there and not, if they're even slightly outside, you can experience some problems when you try to bake normal maps and things, which we won't be doing in this course, but in the future. So there's some issues that can happen, like if the UVs are not technically correct. Also, light baking can be an issue. Right. Yeah, so I have a lot of space there, so it's fine. So I could have fitted more stuff in here. You know, I don't have more stuff, so I could have tried to even optimize it more. What it means, if I'm able to optimize it more, it means that maybe I can scale them up even more. And that means I'm getting more usage out of that data, because I'm getting more resolution for the same amount of data. That's what this comes down to, right? So, yep. So there we go. That's it. So the thing you do then is just really go over it and check. There's a few things you can do. The first thing you go over and check everything's inside 0 to 1. Also that you don't have overlapping UVs per object. Seems like, okay, so and there are some color indicators here that could help us out. So I don't know where they put that. They keep changing everything. There's, let's see, modify image view, shaded. Okay, so I can view this in shaded mode. And then, okay, so you can see right away this is problematic. So here we have an overlapping UV. So what I need to do is select UVs, and I need to move this row of UVs. Let's see, how does this? Okay, all right. No, it's not overlapping. Frankly, I'm not sure why it's giving me that color. Seems like there's an issue here. Maybe there was an issue with the mesh after all. Yeah, so we'd have to look into that. I don't. So these are all fine, and these are giving me problems. Let's see. Revert back to the model. All right, so hang on. I think I have. Let me separate this. So I go mesh, separate. Let me apply a checker. There's a checkerboard pattern in Maya that you can enable. Also, which I don't really use. Where is that again? I typically import the checkerboard like we did yesterday, but there is one in here that you can turn on. Let's see. View. Anyways, let me import a checkerboard. Okay, there we go. So, yeah, you can enable it from the UV viewport right there. And then if you go to, okay, so you have to have it selected. It seems. Okay, well that's fine. So because I guess maybe some of these are the ones I didn't unwrap. Yeah. Okay. So these. Remember I said let's just not I unwrapped this guy, right? So some of them I didn't unwrap. This guy we unwrapped, so that's fine, and this guy we unwrapped. So the other ones are not unwrapped. So that brings up another point. Like sometimes, remember yesterday we said that if you have multiple objects of the same kind in your asset, sometimes it's kind of inefficient to think that, well, they all need to have their separate texture. Maybe not. Maybe a lot of them can share the same texture. In this case, though, I do have a lot of extra space. It's not a problem. I can have them have separate unique textures if I want. But so obviously the way to think about this, I could just copy this object around and it would be the same object, right? If I copy that and move it over here, it's the same object, it just has the same texture. It's just now a copy, right? But if you've already done the placement, there's also a way to copy the UVs from this object over to the next. And that's under, okay, so they've definitely moved that as well. Transfer attributes, no, it's still there. Okay, great. Transfer attributes, under mesh, you can go to the options. And then what I select component type. And then we're going to do UV sets. We don't need color sets. So transfer attributes, right? So UV sets and in component mode. Then I'm going to go click the first one, shift select the next one, and hit apply. So now you see it has copied the UVs over to this object. It obviously needs to be an identical mesh. So click, shift select, apply, and I'm doing that on all of the objects. So now they're all going to get that same UV. So I'm always first selecting the original. Because this is a little, you don't want to shift select the next one. I don't think it has to do with the history state and everything. So okay, there we go. And then I delete history, and now all of these should be fine. So they're just sharing the same UVs. It's exactly the same thing as if making a copy and moving the copy, right? But since we were already had the placement, we're using transfer attributes. Okay, so now, and now I think we won't see any issues, hopefully. So the issue was with the ones that hadn't unwrapped. So that's good. So now you see the color indication. If I hadn't turned on the colors, I would have probably missed that. And I would have thought, oh, okay, my UVs are done. But they wouldn't have been done. So it would have been a huge issue if I delivered it and technically not right. And it would have looked horrible when I applied the checkerboard right later on. So, but here I can tell right away, okay, so the blue indication is good. Everything looks nice. So yeah, so view shaded mode, that's what you want. There's also a way to view UV distortion, it says right here, but we don't need that because we know that the distortion it's practically distortion free because we did this in Headus. So yeah, and then other things that can happen is that the UV shells can become flipped. So if you go, it would also change the color. So this is nice because you can see that they're all the same colors. We know that they're not, none of them are flipped. If they're flipped, the textures will actually appear flipped. So if you have that's why we use checkerboard patterns with numbers. Because if you apply it to a flipped UV, the numbers will be mirrored. There's a quick way to check that. But here I can go, let's see, okay, so they moved it. So there's a lot of new features in here, so maybe, I'm looking for flip. Okay, so there's flip. So I'm flipping those UVs, and you see the color is now red. Just means that the UVs are flipped. Technically, you can have flipped UVs, but again, the textures will be flipped. So you need to know what you're doing. But essentially, then we don't want flipped UVs initially, so you need to be aware of that. And so if you see some red shells when you turn on the shaded mode, that's a problem. So you go in here and fix it. Go to, where was it? Modify, flip. There you go. And that's it. That's our UV layout. It's done. There's no overlapping UVs, hopefully. These are extra blue. I think it's because there's a lot of shells on top of each other. Yeah. That's okay. You can have a lot of shells on top of each other. That just means that there's a lot of objects sharing that same texture, or there are a lot of copies of that object. But you can't have overlapping UVs per object because it can cause problems when baking. Technically, in the end, you can have overlapping UVs per object, but not in a production mesh that's going to go down the pipeline and then you're going to be baking and everything. That's going to cause issues. Alright, so just going over this. Looking good. So this is just check off you need to do, right? Really make sure this is technically solid. So let me illustrate. So even like something like this, if this UV were to be there, that's the technical issue. This could cause when we're trying to bake, like I said, a normal map or displacement map. This little issue, which is really easy to miss, could cause that procedure to fail. And then you wouldn't know why, and you would have to go through and troubleshoot, and that could be potentially very, very time consuming. Whereas now yeah, it takes time, but now it's really worth like every step of the way making sure that this is sort of technically solid. So you refer back to that technical checklist that I posted, and this is one of the issues here with UVs. All right, that's it. And then same procedure as yesterday would be now to just export. So now all of these are just separate meshes. That's great. delete history. See, if I select them, I can still select all the meshes. I can even move the meshes around. It's not going to do anything to the UVs. But when I select them all, I see the entire UV layout for that asset. So the way to then organize this is through materials. So if I make a material for it, and now we have a solution for this staff where the whole staff asset shares the same material, shares the same UV layout. Select all the pieces, right click and hold, assign material to selection. So I select all the pieces, right click and hold on the material and assign material to selection. And then I can go right click and hold, select objects with material, and we'll select it. When I do that, obviously I'm going to see the layout. Where's my hypershade? Hypershade? Oh. Oh, okay, what's happening here? Seems like it's docked into the same window. Okay, I don't want to do that. Move that over there. And then right click and hold, select objects with material, and you can see that's the way you can quickly, this is the way you organize it. But also it's organized here, you know, I can just click that group. This would be staff, you know, the staff. There's also some crystals. Crystals. There's the staff. Okay, great. So that's it. And then, yep, let's select the object material. Now, obviously, same thing as yesterday. So image, UV snapshot, start texturing. When you update the texture file, it doesn't matter which object you're working on. Like everything will update with just one single image file. I think we could try that as a last little thing that we'll do. Make a UV snapshot. Okay, let's call it out UV. It's going to the wrong path here, so let me change the path. So CGArt1, Jules. Okay, I didn't make a Maya project, so it's okay. But that's the path that I want. So yeah, staff UV. So there we have. Hit OK. And there's the staff UVs. Open that with Photoshop. Oh no, I opened the wrong one. Let's see. I don't want Adobe Audition. Alright, let's see. Photoshop. Open. Staff UVs. And there's our things. I can double click, make this a reference, and then start texturing. So let me just make a layer, put that underneath. Let's fill the layer with the bucket tool. Next session is devoted to Photoshop. All Photoshop. Okay, and then set the layout to blending mode screen. So that's going to make the black invisible. We're only looking at the layout. And then let's quickly see if we have some textures we can slap on there. If we go into the browser, I think we'll find some under teaching, Jules, resources, textures. Should be some in here. Like wooden. Let's try that. So wood. Yeah, don't know. Whatever. Put something in there. Yeah. Okay, that's kind of boring. Well, I can make. How large is that? I don't know. Oh, it seems pretty large. Okay, let's try this. And then when I just placed it in there, it places it as a smart object. I have to right click and rasterize the layer. We'll talk about that next time. Put that underneath the layout. Oops, don't move the layout. If I want to lock the layout, I can click that little button that says the lock there. So, okay. Yep. Let's just try this. So, and then I obviously just delete everything that's unwanted from this layer. So I'm just making a lasso selection marquee, a marquee selection. All right. Let's just include all of those pieces. And I don't know what that stuff is. So I didn't spend the time, like I haven't familiarized myself with the layout. I don't know what is what totally, but that's fine for now. So select inverse, delete. So you get the idea. So that wooden texture is now underneath all of these pieces. Right, and then everything else is just green for the moment. Then I can save the PSD document. I always want to save that. So if I had set the project, this would now be in the Maya project folder, and I like saving the PSD in the source images directory, because then every time I hit save in that project, that's the directory the files are going to be saved in. So staff color. No, this is just staff, because this is the PSD document in which I will be doing all the texturing. I'm just going to call that staff PSD. Okay. And then I save a copy, but I'm going to turn off the layout. I don't want that to be baked down onto the color map. So save as, and I go to, let's just do a PNG for this. It's going to be staff underscore color. Whoops. Right, save that. Okay, and in the material, double click the blend that we just made. We can call the blend staff material staff underscore mat, and then follow the link, make a file node. I'm turning off the filter type, and then I'm finding the file, and it is going to the wrong project again. So here I'm just gonna manually go in here and find it, because you won't have this problem if you make a project folder, set project, and now this becomes important because now we're starting to add textures and there's more files associated with the Maya project. So you can see already now it's having issues because it's not finding the path. So I have to dig through here and find it. But staff color, and there we go. So it's reading that from the server. And then, yep, there you go. So that's the effect that's having. Everything except for the wooden pieces I made are green. And then, yeah, no magic. It just means that whatever's underneath those UVs is what's visible. So now seeing that this is also part of the same object, maybe I want the wooden texture also along here. Why not just do that quickly? Copy the wooden texture. Just place that along here. Oops. Oh no. All right. So yep. So just duplicating the layer, dragging it down to that new layer icon, and just dragging copies of it over. I'm using the move tool right there. So these are things we'll talk about next time. So let's not bother with this right now. How this looks doesn't matter. Okay, so then save again. Save both the PSD document, hitting save, and then also save as color PNG. So we're just gonna replace that. And then in Maya, okay, let it save first, and then in Maya, we can just go to the material, to the file node, and click reload. That's going to reload the image file. Should reload the image file. Hello? So this would be more responsive again if you set the correct path. So I think it's probably having issues with that right now. Let me try to save it again. Oh, is Photoshop? Oh, okay, it didn't save yet. That's the issue. Okay, I didn't see that window over the other monitor. Okay, so they're now saving the PNG. The reload should work as long as you set the path manually. There you go. Right. And then, yeah. So that's it. So next time we will be looking more into Photoshop, and this starts becoming more fun. But you know, UV mapping is just one of those technical things you have to do in order to have a paintable mesh, paintable solution. All right, so that's it. Thanks, Edith, for the staff. Yes, brilliant, brilliant. So then, yeah, have fun with Headus. Questions? As long as you have an understanding of UVs, which we started grasping a little bit yesterday. This is more which buttons to push. Now, and about that, there's a quick guide. If you go to Headus, about UV layout, there's a view user guide. Also hotkeys, view user guide is great. So go there and it will open up this document. And here's a guide. There's a lot of stuff in here. But if you go to quick start, this is essentially everything I did. There's a very nice feature which I didn't have a chance to show you, which would be more useful for something like the chair, or where you have more hard, straight lines. Well, let me just show you here. I don't have to do it. You'll try it out. So with the chairs, it would be the exact same approach, like cutting things up, flattening, same thing, but the added little feature that you might want to try for the chair is if you hit R, see it's going to make a straight UV shell. Just pressing R. And that's extremely useful for texturing because sometimes we want to have straight UV shells. So when you have straight UV shells, depending on the mesh, if you have a lot of curvature in the mesh, obviously making it straight, you're going to introduce texture distortion, right? But it's going to make it easier to texture one coherent texture. I usually opt for this for incurved objects because I don't want texture distortion. But in something like the chair, you have a lot of straight objects, and so Headus is great for everything, but you have to then also use this added feature, I think, for the best results, because then pressing R will straighten the UV shells. Okay. All right. So thanks a lot. I guess we could have done both groups. There's no people here. Who came in now for the second group? Three. Okay. No, we'll do another session. You're welcome to hang around if you want. If you want to have a repeat, we're just going to do the same thing again. So it seems like for these night sessions, we might just try to do joint sessions because it's not a lot of people. So, all right. I thought the room would be too crowded, but next time, if we do a night session, we'll just do a joint session, and then if chances are it will get crowded and people can sit together, you know. Yeah. All right. Anyways, so I'm just gonna. Thank you. Great. So I've recorded this one. I think I'll be posting this one. All right. Yes. So we did the cleanup. mesh cleanup. We selected four-sided faces. It makes it select all the quads, and then I did shift marquee selection that will invert the selection. And inverting that selection would mean that now everything that's selected is not a quad, which is not necessarily a problem because it could be tries, which is okay, but we don't want n-gons. And then I can go to wireframe and see if anything's selected, and nothing is selected. And since let me repeat this just for the recording, like really quickly. Like what would happen if we don't have a quad? Let's mess it up. So there's a problem, and we do mesh cleanup, and then we select four-sided faces, and I invert the selection holding shift marquee select. Then I go to wireframe and see, okay, that's selected, so that means that's a problem. So what I also did, I shift I can isolate, and I can see, okay, so now I'm looking at everything that's not a quad. So if you have a lot of problem areas in a mesh, you can do this, and then you can go right click and hold and assign favorite material, Lambert. You're assigning a new material to those selection of faces, and then I can make that material, for instance, red, and then I can go back to object mode and select nothing, and then click shift I to isolate nothing, and then click 5. That will make all the quads red. So if you have a lot of work ahead of you, this could be a good idea because in a really visual way of just really telling you like what's not a quad. And then you'd fix it, okay, that's obviously not a quad, and then we go multi-cut. It's called now, multi-cut. And then you go there, and click enter, and now we know that's fine, but we will do another cleanup. Select four-sided faces, apply, and then invert the selection. Shift I, you see nothing happens, nothing is selected. And then we would just apply the other shader to those. Assign Lambert 1, which is the default material. Right. Okay. Summarized, that was what we did. But this is a good mesh. It looks clean, but it brings up another issue. Not issue, it brings up another point. That's why. Because this mesh, it's beautiful, but it's meant to be subdivided, right? Right, Diego? This is meant to be subdivided, right? Right. So pressing 3, this is the look that we're going for. So this is an important point that relates directly to UV mapping, because if I press number 1, this is what you call the poly cage, right? The carefully manufactured mesh that just drives the curvature. So when I press 3, I can see the subdivided result, and all the creasing edges and everything is just placed in a way that makes for this beautiful subdivision, right? But I don't want to UV map this version. I don't want to UV map this because there's none of that curvature in the mesh. You see, when I press 3, yeah, then I see the curvature, and you could get away with UV mapping this, but optimally, I wouldn't do that. I would have that curvature. Make sure to have that curvature in the mesh I'm UV mapping. That means I would probably, in this case, sort of commit to that shape first. And this is very relevant, so we can spend a little bit of time talking about this, because you would want to make sure that you have that final curvature in the mesh that you're UV mapping. It means that it's going to be a little more dense, but it's worth it because you're going to have a better approximation to the final result. So smooth. So that means I'm committing to that shape. Smooth, remember, is the same thing as pressing 3, except that now we're sort of committing to that shape. So if it's set to smooth subdivision level 1, it's going to quadruple the poly count. But I don't have to be pleased with this. I could go over here and say, well, now there's too many edge loops here. I don't need all of them. So I could go over and control backspace and really make the version of this mesh that I'm happy with before I UV map it. So I can still go in here and see that now that curvature is retained. That's all I want. That's all I'm talking about. See that? That's enough. We have that curvature. You see here on the poly cage, we don't have that. It's just a straight line. Here we have it. Here we have all that curvature. So it's going to be easier a much more predictable. It's not going to be easier to UV map it, but it's going to be more predictable and technically better to do it this way. But this would require cleanup. You would have to go in here and really, you don't need it to be too dense, right? So that's the little extra work that this would entail. I'm probably go in here and say, wherever you don't need it, see here I kind of need it for that curvature, so I want that. But wherever the edges are not really contributing to the curvature or the contours, you can get rid of them. So maybe, but here they're needed. Here maybe there's too many, so I'm going to get rid of that. Maybe I can live with getting rid of that. All right, so you get the idea, right? Just go in here, get rid of that. If you smooth it, doesn't mean that you have to be done with it. You can keep working with it. So generally, though, you probably want like more or less an even polygon distribution. It means that the polys should be more or less the same size, which is just like a general thing. But also something you can deviate from a little bit. But you get the idea, right? So, all right. And then also the slide edge tool is really great for this. Mesh tool, slide edge. Because I can, now I have this edge loop, but I can slide it around and it will follow that contour. So, middle mouse button and drag it. So you see, still keep working the mesh. Okay, so this is a pretty complicated piece. Let's see, we can try it in Headus. Let's see what happens. This is something that would typically take longer, but let's put it in there and we'll have some fun in Headus. All right, so same for the door, but here I can see that the curvature maybe it's okay. You have to use your own judgment. I can see that it's a little bit different solution here because you see that it's not just a straight door. And when I press 3, I have that curvature actually here, so maybe that's okay for the door. Yeah, you know. All right, so press number 1, delete history, freeze transformations, make sure everything is clean. And you can see that down at the left corner, you see the C-axis. I would flip this entire thing around because the C-axis should be pointing forward. So in other words, this should be the front. So I'm going to just rotate that group, which it's in, 180 and the Y. There we go. And then just delete history and freeze transformations again. I should save the scene. So I'm going to up version that. Truck example 02. There we go. So I'm guessing this one doesn't have any UVs. We can go and take a look. UV editor. So yeah, you have the UVs, Diego. We don't need to make them. All right, let's make some UVs for it. Pretend it doesn't have UVs. So this is a bit heavy. Let's see what happens in Headus. I think we'll start with the door, then you'll get the idea. And then, all right. So for multi-mesh assets, so with assets that have multiple objects, which in this case we are dealing with an asset that has multiple objects, an elegant way of doing this is that wherever you have copies, you can just we will only unwrap one of the copies. We don't need to import both of the doors. We wouldn't need to import both of the tires. Just one of each, right? And then when you have one of each symmetrical object and everything selected, we can actually combine them now and then delete history, freeze transformations. Yeah. I don't want that color indication there. Go away. There you go. All right. So, okay. Export. OBJ, export selection, and we're going to do truck. So I just leave the OBJ export settings as is, except for I turn off the materials. I don't need the material. I don't need to export the material for it. That's all. Export, OBJ, export, boom. All right, so now finally, let's go to Headus. This was the previous example. New. No. Truck. Okay. All right, so Headus looks like that. Double click it. It looks like that. Very unassuming little UI, but it's a very powerful tool for UV mapping. Then, okay, so I figured out how to get this path in there. I can just go to the file browser, copy the path. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Copy the path, and then go load, and then here at the bottom, just highlight everything, and then paste the path and hit enter. Just gonna go to the server, and then there's the truck OBJ. So then I can hit load, and it's gonna load it into its viewport. So the viewport is kind of like Maya. Here I can make it larger. So you navigate around in the same fashion. One thing you'll notice, it's a bit weird rotating around, and that's because for some reason they like to lock the z-axis. So you go in there and you under display set it to free, and you can freely rotate. So there it is. This is the edit mode viewport. This is where we're going to be cutting things. So like yesterday we looked at projection based UV mapping, where you take pictures of the thing in Maya and then you assemble it and glue everything together, which is very, very, very time consuming and not the best way to go about it. So here we're just gonna, this is literally, you have to think like you have this object in front of you and then we're just gonna cut it open. And where does it make sense to start cutting the object so that we can unwrap it, right? So that this is unwrapping, that's what we're gonna do here. So we can separate the objects. So typically we would have more objects in here, right? I would just import everything associated with the asset and one copy for each of the symmetrical objects in one go. And then spacebar, middle mouse button, I can drag these around just to separate them. So let's just start with that door. So we'll get that out of the way. This is a pretty flat object, right? It's pretty flat. Let's just try to drop it into UV mode and as it is without cutting it. So to drop it, I just press D. It's going to drop it to UV space. Then I can go here. You see, I can toggle between UV mode and edit mode. So there's here we go. Here we're in UV space. The red zone here is the 0 to 1 quadrant. It's still there, it hasn't been unwrapped. And then I can go Shift F. I hover over the object and hit Shift F. That's going to run the flattening operation. So there it did the unwrap, and then I hit spacebar to finish. And that's it. And then I can hit spacebar, left mouse button to rotate, middle mouse button to place it around. What I don't want to do is spacebar, right mouse button and scale, because see, that's going to mess up the scale. And that's one of the reasons I like bringing all of these objects in here at once, because it's going to keep the same texel density. In other words, it's going to keep the same scale. So the whole object, when I just keep unwrapping, if I don't go like this and scale it down, all of them are going to have the same texel density. All right. So if I click 1, I'm in UV mode. If I click 2, I can go to edit mode again. I can also click over here. If I click 3, I'm in this other mode where I can actually preview what the what the texture would look like. So if I hit T for texture, I can toggle between different modes. So here's the normal checkerboard. If I hit T again, we have more of like a checkerboard we looked at yesterday. So you can see that that's actually a minimum, very minimal texture distortion. It's a very good unwrap because it's a pretty flat object. You know, that's good. So we go back to 2, which is edit mode. Let's just drop this into UV world, and then this is now here we're in UV space. This isn't unwrapped yet, but I just want to see if I go to number 3 and press. Oh, I can't preview that unless I unwrap it. Okay. Oh, never mind then. Shift D to undrop. Okay. All right. So for this, more challenging, right? First of all, it's a symmetrical object, so that helps. So in Headus, we can actually make it recognize the symmetry. So we can go Edit, Symmetry, Find, and then we highlight the middle edge, which you should always have a middle edge dividing line at 0x. So if I click there and hit spacebar, oh, so it says it's not perfectly symmetrical. Somewhere near green marked polys. It's not perfectly symmetrical. Okay. So it's telling us that it's not there. Oh, okay. So that has to do with, yeah, I don't know. Could have been me when I was fiddling around with it. But if you wanted to make it perfectly symmetrical, we could just do a mirror geometry right in Maya before we put it in here. It's not a big problem. It's not technically incorrect to have a not perfectly symmetrical model. But we'll see what happens now when we start cutting, if it's going to be able to cut it. So generally, like building an asset like this, which is a truck, this could be done in separate meshes. So you would have one separate mesh for the hood of the car, and also for each of the panels. So if you look at a truck, you would see that the truck is actually constructed of several different panels, right? There's very few cars that's assembled like a manifold, everything's like merged together. There are some cars, but where you have really large parts. But in old cars, especially like this, you would have a lot of panels and different. So the benefit of building it the way it's actually would be manufactured is that, well, there's a whole range of benefits. You would just get a more natural, like light would be occluded in all those little cavities. That's one thing. You could animate it. Obviously, you can open the hood and everything, but that's fine. So in this case, we have this whole mesh. It's great. It's okay. So it could be like a toy car, or you can even build. You could build a truck like this, but it has its limitations, right? And it also makes the UV mapping a little more difficult because now we have to UV map this huge mesh. But it's okay because but it will take some more time. All right, but let's start cutting it up. So I'm going to start by just cutting the hood off, I guess. So just do C for cut. So C. So I hover over the edge and I press C. That's for cut. And there it did it. So it's just recognize. You might have to click a couple of times. I don't know how to get it to do the whole edge loop. Maybe there's a button for it. But I have to keep clicking C, and then it would gradually grow that selection, and then we have that entire edge loop. And now if I hit enter, it's going to cut it. So here we start cutting things, right? So I can go spacebar, middle mouse button, drag these apart. Now I cut that open. Now this is also a pretty flat piece, so maybe I could try to drop it. I'm going to hit D, go number 1. I'll go Shift F and spacebar. There you go. So it does that unwrapping automatically. So Shift F, spacebar, and then we can go press number 3. And we can preview the texture distortion. You see, that's also very good. The red color indication indicates distortion, right? So yes, there will be some slight distortion here. If you imagine like a cardboard box, it would be if if I cut open here, for instance, I could easily get rid of that distortion. Let's try to do that. If I cut here, not necessarily in here, and also down at the bottom. So I'm not forcing those two ends to like stick together. And press enter. So I can also cut in here in UV mode. And then I press F. I can just simply press F to just flatten it a little bit. So there you go. Got rid of that distortion. Different solution for the UV shell. Go to number 3. I press T to go to this one. You see even less texture distortion. Same for the door. I could have gotten rid of that tiny distortion, but it's not such a big deal in this example. All right. So back to edit mode. We keep cutting. Keep cutting away. So in traditional texturing, if you're using Photoshop, one thing you have to think about is you don't want, like wherever you place these, wherever you make the cuts, you're going to have potential texture seams, right? So you want to spend some time and figure out where's the best place to hide a seam. So you probably want to make the cuts where they're not as visible. And sometimes there's not really an option. You just have to make it somewhere. So in this case, I'm not going to spend too much time thinking about it. Let's make an obvious cut here. I guess let me just cut this open. And there we go. Press enter. So I always just like space bar, middle mouse button, and drag it apart so I can just tell that it's separated. And then press D to drop it. Go number 1 back in UV mode. Why did it drop this one? Shift D to undrop. So if you drop something you didn't mean to drop, you just press Shift D. So now it didn't want to do it symmetrically because it's not finding that it's 100% symmetrical mesh. So I'm going to have to do it over here as well. So, this is the process in Headus. You keep cutting, fiddling around, and dropping things. Pressing D. All right. All right. Maybe I can cut that piece. So it would help, obviously, if it were 100% symmetrical. Right now it would make life a little bit easier. That's fine. So seems like I have to do it twice. Drop that, drop this, press number 1. The more challenging the pieces are, it's going to be more difficult to unwrap. Let me undrop that. I don't know what that's doing there. I think maybe I think I need to turn off symmetry now because it seems like it's definitely getting confused. So it seems like it bugged out on me a little bit since it wasn't perfectly symmetrical and I had to, okay, let me turn off symmetry. Let me figure this out. Drop that. Shift F. All right. So all of what I'm doing now would have been unnecessary then if the object was symmetrical. So this is turning out to be a challenging example. But okay, so now I'm just going in here and I hold control middle mouse button. I can drag UVs around. So sometimes that's necessary. You have to go really close in here. Control click middle mouse button. I can still manipulate UVs per UV. So C for cut, and W, you can also weld edges back together. And then Shift F to flatten, and spacebar. And here I can go back in and weld things. I'm hitting W, W. So there we go. I'm going to cut that little piece off. And that probably fits down here, I guess. Let's see, weld, weld. So W will weld it back together. So, yeah. And these two parts, I'm going to cut them apart. Press C and Shift F. Spacebar. Don't really know what I'm looking at anymore. What's this? I guess that's all right. I'm gonna keep unwrapping. Keep it up. Drop this piece. Shift F, spacebar. Okay. So it seems like this is probably the other side of that. Yeah, so then maybe I can weld these. Yes. So I'm going to weld WWW. I'm going to weld all these back together. So I will get another continuous shell. Press enter and then hit F. F to keep flattening. And then go in here, hit W, hit F. So you see now I have that one, which is similar to the other one. So in large UV layout projects like this one, it's probably smart to save the UV layout document so that I can open this and continue. So I'm going to go and what did I just do? X-ray. No, thank you. So save and truck. So I'm going to go down here where it says OBJ. I'm just going to erase that and I'm going to type in UVL. UVL stands for UV layout. Save. Now we have a UVL document, which is like a Maya scene, but it's a Headus scene. Okay, press 1. So yeah, it's going pretty good. So now we're recognizing more of a symmetry here starting to happen. Good. So I'm not worrying about the placement. I'm not doing the layout. We're simply doing the unwrap. We're unwrapping things, cutting things open. Back to edit mode. Yeah, it's going pretty well. All right, so let's. I'm just gonna cut this front part. Okay, now I think we can turn on symmetry again. We're gonna try that. So find. Yes, now it's symmetrical. I think this. Yeah. Now it's 100% symmetrical. So now it should be able to very quickly just do that, and it will just apply the same changes. I can drop this front part, press 1 to go to UV mode, Shift F, and it seems like it has issues again. All right, so here, symmetry is active, okay, because this part is grayed out. Seems like it's having some issues. If I hold the mouse, if I hover over here and I hit S, okay, it's going to try to make it symmetrical, which it just did. So it fixed the problem. Yep. All these little tricks. Let me mention it. About UV layout, you can click there, and you can view user guide if you're particularly interesting. There's a lot of powerful features in here. After all, it's a software that only does UV mapping, so you'd expect to find a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of stuff. But if you go down here to Quick Start, you'll find a list of things that we're essentially exactly what we're doing right now. If you're wondering about the hotkeys and everything, which I probably should have mentioned in the beginning, but there you go, quick start. Okay. All right. So this is going well. Now we have the front taken care of, and let's do. Let me just cut this little part, and I'll drop that, and I'll do this side panel in one go. Let's try that, and drop that. So Shift F, spacebar, and now hitting S is going to make that symmetrical change again. That piece has no symmetrical, well, it's symmetrical in itself, but it's in the middle. All right, and keep going. So we'll do the window frame, or the part that's around the window, the windshield. Drop that, press 1, Shift F, spacebar. I don't know what that color indication is. Is that a problem? Maybe that's a problem. I don't know. I don't think so. Let's go to number 3, have a look. So it's looking pretty good as far as distortion, or lack of distortion. Press 1, press 2. So, alright. What can we do? Maybe I'll just tear off the roof. I don't know. Let's see. Okay, there we go. Yeah, we'll do that. And just do this. Maybe, and space bar, middle mouse button. See, okay, and D to drop that. Shift F, space bar, number 2, and I'll just cut here. And this one will just drop. So there we go. Press number 1 again. Shift F, space bar. So if we were doing this truck this way, or not this way, but with using projection-based approach like yesterday. Oh no, did it crash? No, it didn't crash. That's good. It would have taken probably the better part of this working day, at least. This is a complex object. To get this result, like with traditional methods, it would be like, well, this is traditional at this point. I mean, Headus has been around for a lot of years. But before you did like projection-based UV mapping, it used to be a lot less fun, even though this isn't too much fun. This used to occupy a lot of time. But whenever there's new technology, whenever there's like new tools, that's a part of this field. You always have to learn new tools all the time. It never ends. I mean, it's not going to be long till we can just tell an AI to, okay, look at this, just make it flat. You know, should be a very simple job for an AI. But we still have to do this. So you can listen to music or audiobooks or send out and just click away. Yep. Anyways, so we haven't done the layout. This is just unwrapped. Everything's unwrapped. We're good. It looks good. Now I'm going to save again. I'm going to save the UVL. Save done. I'm going to save. I'm just going to override the previous OBJ. So I'm going to select that and save. Did it save it? I'm not sure. Save truck 2. Okay, save truck 2. And then import it. And let me hide this guy. Control H. And then truck 2 OBJ. Drag that in there. There we go. And if we open up the UV texture editor, UV editor, we'll see the same thing. There are the UVs, and they should correspond exactly to this. So in Headus, the little red square, that's the 0 to 1 space. And there are some packing features in here. If you go to pack, I don't really use these, but some people like them. It's an automatic thing, and you can set it to compute, and it will try to maximize UV, optimize the UV layout. But all right, we can try it. Pack all and see what happens. Actually pretty good. Maybe I like it anyways. That's nice. But it's a very even. It keeps everything to the same scale. Everything is the same textile density. When I press number 3, you see that these checkerboards are perfect. Perfect. Automatic, because we just combined everything, exported it. I haven't been scaling them independently. So, all right, cool, great. So let me save this one again. This will be truck 3. Save us a little bit of time maybe. But I'd still go over and I'd do like a little bit of extra work here in Maya to make the final layout. I personally like doing that in Maya. So I've just dragged that in there, truck 3, and now this is our starting point. So everything is in 0 to 1. That's nice. It did a pretty good job. This is nice. But so the job here then would be to go over and make it, condense it as much as you can, right? Especially for games. For games, this is really crucial. You have to make sure that you can maximize this space as much as possible, like we talked about yesterday, because this is all about not wasting data, which is, if you're concerned with poly count and when you're making your in-game models, you should stop worrying and you should start worrying about wasting texture resolution, because that's a much greater concern in terms of performance. For VFX, it's granted it's a little more, we have more slack, but we'll still you don't have to optimize it as much. You can be a little more, but we'll still optimize it. We don't want to waste data. So, all right, let's see. And then, of course, you'd have to make a little bit sense of this eventually when you're starting, before you start to paint, so that you familiarize yourself with what am I looking at? What is what? And you can also make this like an optimal UV layout. You'd sort of get what you're looking at when you're looking at the layout, the way it's distributed. So this is the front. These are the headlights. If I go into the UV toolkit, I can go to transform, I can go down to rotate. Here I can rotate in increments. So for instance, if I place the lights, the UV shells that I know are the lights, I can place them next to the front grille. That makes sense. So a beautiful layout, you just sort of instinctively know what you're looking at. And that's a great help. And this is probably the front hood, right? So I can rotate that. And this is probably the front of the hood. So there you see, I'm just building the car in a flat version, right? And there's the door. But I'm not done, because I have some symmetrical objects that we have to deal with. So there's going to be one more door. I could also have all the doors. I could share the same UV space. But let me make a copy. So I can, okay, so I'm going to separate the meshes. And I'm going to delete history. I'm going to copy the door. For the copy of the door, I'm going to type in 0, 1 in scale X. I'm going to delete history and freeze transformations. And there you see something happened. Something happened. Seems like the placement is a little bit off, and I think that has to do with our mesh not being 100% symmetrical. Because I just duplicated the door over, and if we were dealing with a perfectly symmetrical mesh, it would just match the other side, but it's not really matching. You see it's in there. Not a big concern. We can move it a little bit. But okay, so you see my point here is here in the UVs, if we go to View, you go to View. You can view it in wireframe mode, or there's also a shaded mode for the UVs. You can also press 4 or 5. What you want to see is mostly the same color. If there's a lot of color indication here, it means that something is wrong with the UVs. It could be that they're flipped or that you have overlapping UVs per object. Let me show you what that looks like. That's like if I grab one of these UVs and I go like this. You see that? That's the color indication that, watch out, that's not good. So even like a tiny little problem like that, it's hard to spot. But this would cause problems. It could be like when you're baking a normal map, which we're not going to be doing, but that's very, very, very common to do. Your mesh would cause that process most likely to crash in a lot of cases if the UVs are overlapping per object like this. It's technically not okay. So make sure you go over and you check that the UVs are not overlapping per object. And this means, here we go, this is the copy of the door I just made. You can see that it has a different color. And that it's because it's flipped, right? The UVs are flipped. That's because I copied the door by entering a value of -1 for the scale X. And then I froze the transformation values. That means it's now the UVs are flipped. If I want to flip the UVs, again, flip them back, I select the UV shell and I go modify flip. Now you see it has the same color again, and everything is fine. So that's how you can copy symmetrical objects and make sure that the UVs don't remain flipped. Depending on the texture you're using, like flipped UVs are not necessarily technically a big no-no. It just means that the texture you're applying will be flipped or mirrored. So depending on the texture, you might not notice that. You know, if it's like metal or whatever, there's a whole range of textures you're not going to see if it's mirrored. It's only if you have like recognizable patterns, like numbers or letters. And that's why we're using the checkerboard with numbers. That means if the numbers are flipped, it means that the UVs are flipped. Okay. All right. So then, okay, now we at least have 2 doors. And that just proves the example, and we're going to leave it at that. But you know, if we had copied more objects, it would be the same process. We would just do one symmetrical version, and then you can copy it over, and then just make sure that you flip the UVs. Okay. Then back here, keep working on this. So then we have 2 doors. Ta-da. All right. Okay. So this is also a nice way to work. So I have the viewport open at the same time as, and you have 2 monitors, so that's a luxury. So you can have the layout on one monitor and then have the viewport on one. So it's easy to navigate. Because when you select, if I right click and hold and I select UV shell, you'll see on the model what belongs where. So then there's the hood, there's the doors, and then I can gradually make sense of this. That's actually the back. So depending on how far you want to take this, I'm not going to, you know, it's nice to, okay, so that is actually the roof. So maybe we'll put that on top, but that's the back of the car, you know. And that's actually the front side over here. You get the idea. So yep, working with this, making a nice layout. But it is nice that it's human readable and it sort of makes sense. So I'm going to try to make sure that the symmetry works so that all the pieces that it belong, they're on the right side of things. And that's actually the window frame. Okay. Let me move. Yeah, this is getting messy. So this can take some time, but it's kind of rewarding when you finally have this, because you will be working, like texturing is really time consuming, right? So much more time consuming than UV mapping. You'll be working a long time, usually with the texturing. If you're painting, especially in Photoshop. So then it makes sense to spend that time here and make sure this works. And that was actually the roof, and that's the back of the car. And I can also see like what's the top, and that's the top. Okay, so the top can be there. So there you see, we just wrap the car, flat version. There you go. It's nice. And I want to be careful. I'm not scaling any of these independently of anything, because the scale is right. The textile density, we just got that automatically since we exported everything to Headus. So, and then those are the frames around the door. Okay. Let's see, where's the top? Maybe, oops. I don't like this docking thing. It's very annoying. Okay. UV toolkit, go back in here. No. All right, let's see. Yeah, so that's probably the front. There we go. Mm. Okay. Let's see. Yep, that's the top of that. That's the front. That's the corresponding piece. So it's this big puzzle. Now it starts coming together. And you can see it really starts making sense. Like you can see what this is intuitively when you look at it. Sort of. And that's a good layout. That's a beautiful layout. What's that piece? So that's on the wrong side. So I'm going to move it over there, and this is the other side. That's the underline of the. All right, let's see here. Okay. It's a little fun. It's like a puzzle. There you go. Like I said, this is great for listening to audiobooks or radio or music. There's no thinking involved. Very Zen-like. Alright. Nice. And that's the main windshield. And okay, I'm gonna just fit that in there, I guess. I'm done with this. You get the idea. Alright. Put it there. Oh, so one thing I could have done, like go rotate. No, so I want to fit it in here, so I'm going to rotate it like that. Okay, you can do that, but that would make it a little harder to paint on, right, in Photoshop. So there's this balance. Maybe you want to be nice to yourself, thinking that this is, after all, going to be used as a reference for texture painting. So maybe it's nicer if the windshield is just left straight. A little bit easier. Anyways, so that's a totally decent, acceptable layout. You see the color indication shows us all the same colors. They're not flipped. And then we very carefully go over and actually look for overlapping UVs. It seems like unnecessarily like we're being very pedantic and going over, but it's really, if you have overlapping UVs, like I said, it can cause problems baking, and then you'd have to spend time troubleshooting. So each step of the way, you want to make sure that we're doing this technically, we're following those technical specifications, the technical checklist that I made. It's pretty important. So before you UV map, your model needs to be solid. Before you hand out for texturing, your UV map needs to be solid. If it's not, it's going to cause extra work. Because when you redo the UVs, obviously now they're not going to match the texture, you know. So it's labor intensive. But there we go. And I have more space in here. Obviously, I can fit more things. So this currently, now we're just going to look at, so I have this, I'm going to save this scene. Okay. Yeah, so the way to organize this. So like I said, there's no set rule for how many layouts an asset will have. What's pretty common in in-game assets is that maybe you would condense everything into one layout. Okay, so if you have a lot of similar objects, I'm going to repeat this, in your asset, it's sometimes very inefficient to have all of those objects sharing or having a unique UV coordinate. The only thing you're achieving then is that you're able to make each of those objects have their unique texture, right? But chances are people won't notice, and people don't notice, that a lot of those objects share the same texture. That's not noticeable. Maybe if you have a lot of the similar objects, you would have like maybe 2 or 3 versions of it. So what I mean is, let's just imagine this truck had 5 doors, and I can just make a copy of this door, and I put it there, I put one there, and I put one there. Okay, it has a lot of doors. It has 8 doors, and they're all the same. This is what I mean. This is technically totally fine and perfect. These doors are exactly the same. They're sharing exactly the same UV space. That's technically totally fine. They're separate objects. That's fine. You can't have overlapping UVs per object. So in this door in itself, that just means that this UV can't be like that. All right, that's what that means. Right? Because now, if I were to make a separate UV coordinate for each of those 8 doors, they would occupy a lot of space. And they would be wasting space. It's like, oh, I have all these doors and they need all their separate textures. And they would occupy all the space I have. But since they're sharing the texture, it's much more optimized. Make sense? But let's say you have a lot of them and it's too obvious that they're similar. Well, then you can make maybe a couple of versions. So this door, its UV shell I can move over, and then, you know. Okay, so let me show you one thing. If you have identical objects, there's a way to copy the UVs over to the other object. So let me say that this UV was just weird. Let's do whatever. Let's do based on camera. So UVs, no good. But I can copy the UVs from this object to this object as long as they're the same mesh. So I click once, should select the one I want to copy to, and then I go Mesh, Transfer Attributes, Options. Then I want to set this to, I can reset the settings. So I want to set it to UV sets, all, color sets, off. Then I'm doing this in component mode. Alright, so first you select the one you're copying from, you shift select the one you're copying to, and apply. Now we just copied the UVs from one mesh to the other. Just because they're identical meshes, we can do that. All right. Let's see if, I don't know if there's a way to make a button for it because I can't control shift click it. Maybe we can use, this is, let's see. Transfer this. I don't know if this would make it global. Let's see. No. And we'll mess up these. Let's see. Delete history. UVs. Camera based. Delete history. And dun. Yeah, okay. So, if you have a lot of them, it can be helpful to have a button for it. I don't know if you can make buttons for things. You can control shift click anything to make a button like we talked about. You can also open the script editor and then you'll see like what's going on under the hood when you do things. So like let's say I'll create polygonal cube. This is the code. Right? That's the code that happens. So I can go window script editor. I can see the code and then I can just select the code. Middle mouse button, click and drag it up onto the shelf, and then I make it a mel. Mel is my embedded language. There. Now I have a button. So you can make custom buttons. All right, great. Anyways, so outside of this lesson. So anyways, that's great. We have a human readable layout. We even did it on time. That's nice. So let's see. Yes. So now we would just do right click and do assign favorite material. We can just assign a blend. You know, this would be the material. Now, if we go to the hypershade window, rendering editors, hypershade. There's the material for it. It's called blend 1. Let me rename it. So this will be truck material. And then the way to quickly select all the objects that are in the same layout. Now this maybe get a little confusing because if you have one asset, like I said, there's no rule. I can't know, there's no way of knowing how many layouts you choose to have for this truck asset. Maybe you have 5 layouts, or 10, or 1. If it's an in-game truck, maybe one 4K or 2K map. If it's like a hero truck in a game, maybe a couple of, even like today, I don't know, maybe a couple of 4K maps, right? But point is, this varies a lot. If it's a huge hero VFX asset, you could have any number of 4K maps. So the way to organize this is, okay, currently I know that all of this is in one map. But if I have all these other elements, it can start getting confusing. But then you can organize it like this. So now I just assign a material to all of the elements that are a part of the same layout. And then if I right click and hold, I can select objects with material. Now that all of them are selected. Then I can go window or to the UV texture editor and they're all selected. And that's the layout. So that's how you make sense of this. That's how you can really quickly and easily organize it. Because if they're sharing the same layout, it means that they're sharing the same material. Right? So this is the same that we did yesterday. What we're going to do now, do images, UV snapshot, and same procedure. And this is the reference, obviously, then for texturing. UV snapshot. It's going to save it in. Okay, so here, now it becomes really important that you're working in Maya projects and that you're setting the project before you start working, all of that, because now it needs to read the correct texture paths. And I haven't set it, so I just need to go in here and browse and sort of tell it where I want the file to go. So it's going to work, CGArt1, jewels. Alright, so there's, I'm going to put it there. So this is going to be truck UV. And it's going to be a JPEG. It's going to be 2K. Okay, great. And then in Photoshop, truck, truck UV. There it is. So now, let's just find, I think, on the server we have some, a few textures. Let's see, if I go teaching, jewels, resources, textures, there's a few in here. Let's see. I don't know what could be nice. Nothing, it seems. I don't have any. Anyways, let's just do Rust. So I'll open. Let me actually open this. All right. I'll open it here. All right. Let's see. Rust. Okay, no. Let's quickly find a texture. Just something. Okay, let's do painted metal. Like this. And okay, I gotta log in. Whoa, excuse me. That woke people up. It's good. It's getting late. Should have been earlier. We had a feedback from the speakers. Were you here for that? No, that was previous session. That woke people up. Okay, so download. Where did it go? Downloads. No. Download. Show in folder. Okay. Okay, let's get this into Photoshop. Okay, so let's just look at this very quickly. So obviously paste it in there. Okay, so now I'm just going to drag this. Okay, double click on the background layer. It's going to unlock it. And then I'm going to drag it up here. So next time is all about Photoshop, right? So you're going to, and I'm going to set this to screen so that we see just the layout. The blending mode screen just makes the black invisible, and then you see the white on top. Okay. And then we can also lock the layer. Just click the lock. Now we can't move the layout, which is helpful. And then, this is the color. So this is what we're doing next time. So by next time, as you understand, you need nice layouts. So let's do the door, and then we call it a day. Let me. Why it's not? All right. Let's do this. Oh crap. Okay. So select inverse. Boom. Alright, so there we have a little bit of color underneath the door. So obviously this is just the same process as yesterday. This is just literally the pattern that you have to follow. Place the textures where you want. Okay, then I'm going to save the PSD document. That's the document in which all the texturing for the truck takes place. So this is truck PSD. I'm going to turn off the layout. Okay, I don't want that invisible. I don't want that transparent grid transparency on this. So I'm going to make let's just make a green or whatever color. Then we're going to save this, save the document, and then save as, and we're going to save out the color map. So in this case, let's go with a simple PNG. This will be truck colored. Okay, so then go to Maya, and we go to our truck material, double click it, and go here to the attach the file node, and we select the file node, and we go turn off the filter type, go to the folder, find the file. Oh, and it went to the right path. Nice. So truck color, there it is. What's going to happen? This is going to be on the door. The rest is going to be green. Open. Press number 6, and let's look at the door. Yay. And since all the doors are sharing it, they're all going to have the same. So that's how you do that. And it's just the same as yesterday. It's just because these are laying here and I can move them. Now they will be green. Look at that. Nice. Alright, so yay. So this is a pretty, you know, little more challenging example, but fun. Right, so we got to test Headus a little bit. Right. So, okay. If you want to hang around, there's something starting now. Now it's 11 o'clock in California. Now, ZBrush Summit, they're going to have a sculpt off. It will take place all night tonight and tomorrow night and the night after that. So we've made the building available for you. So if you want to access the building at night, you can. Yes, yes, yes. So Luai was here earlier. He's sort of taking charge at this. Yeah, I think he's. Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. So cool. Anyways, so I recorded this as well. So now you have a lot of information. So next time. We will be submitting a status report for this, how it's going, so that will be interesting. Right, so good luck.